This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. I used Squarespace to build both Basics with Babish and BingingWithBabish.com. On the sites, you'll find recipes, equipment lists, other news, and updates. All beautifully designed, if I do say so myself. Get 10% off your first Squarespace order by visiting squarespace.com/babish.
Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Arcade with Alvin. Today we'll be taking on the Marbled Rock Roast from The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. The Marbled Rock Roast is something that a lot of the Gorons eat in the game. Now, as fun as it would be to cook a giant rock, I think it'd probably make more sense to do an edible version of this. So what if instead of a Marbled Rock Roast, we use a nice piece of meat, like a marbled beef roast? To emulate the marbled rocky pattern, what if we did a marbled roast Beef Wellington, but with the beautiful USDA prime chuck roast? Because typically Beef Wellington uses filet mignon, which doesn't have a lot of fat in it, but chuck roast is pretty well marbled in my opinion. And the pastry shell of a Wellington should emulate the rocky rock patterns on the rock roast, so let's give it a shot. So let's get started with the beef first. I'm going to place a large boneless 4-pound USDA prime chuck roast onto a sheet tray lined with a wire rack. Then it's going to get a heavy seasoning of salt and pepper and left to sit in the fridge for some of that seasoning to absorb. Now onto the duxelle. The duxelle is sort of this mushroom, onion, shallot paste that goes inside the Beef Wellington, both insulating the beef as well as acting as an absorber from all the juices while adding its own flavor. Kind of a nice little flavor bomb to the beef. And to make that, I'm using the food processor to help me break down 1.5 pounds of cremini mushrooms, 2 shallots, and 4 garlic cloves. Instead of chopping this all by hand, I found that using a food processor and kind of shoving it down here and there gives you a smoother paste. Why these two ended up a totally different color, I'm not so sure, but they're going into the same pan. We're also going to throw in a pinch of salt to season this, but also to help draw out some water so that it helps cook out the water faster. That's what the duxelle looks like after an hour and a half of cooking it over a medium heat. Now we're just going to set that aside before we need it again. Smells really good though. Now we're going to make some crepes. Now these are a little different than the crepes that you see smothered in fruit and Nutella often seen on brunch menus. These are just simple little bread sponges that'll help absorb a lot of the juices during the cooking. Very simple, just 1 cup of milk, crack in 2 eggs. Make sure to also not put the shell inside the milk. That is not part of the recipe, so we're going to take that out real quick, followed by an immersion blender which helps mix this while I dump in 1 cup of flour. Since we can't really afford to have chunks or lumps like this in pancakes, we got to make sure that this batter is smooth. And the immersion blender is my favorite way of turning all of your chunky problems into one smooth solution. Once the batter is ready, I'm putting this into a non-stick pan over medium heat with approximately 1/3 cup of batter, swirling it around and making sure that the edges get crisp before I flip this over. I'm going to repeat this process 4 times to make sure that we get nice coverage for our Wellington later. Without the crepes, it can get kind of soggy, and just like socks, it's not nice to have a soggy Wellington. Once all the 4 crepes are now off to the side on a paper towel to rest, we're going to go ahead and fill this with 3 tablespoons of oil and sear our beef at a very high heat. I just want to make sure I can get all the sides a nice dark crust to make sure that there's a little flavor before throwing this into everything else. And this also provides a nice exterior for mustard. In my experience in making Beef Wellingtons, the mustard is actually a pretty important component. It adds a nice bit of acidity and counterpart to all of the rich flavors going on otherwise. Plus, it's also very fun to do. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit more extra salt and pepper on top of the mustard, just for extra measure and seasoning. Once the beef has a nice yellow coat on, we're going to put it back into the fridge so it can rest and absorb all those nice flavors from the resting juices, the salt and pepper, and the mustard. To assemble our Beef Wellington, we're going to start by laying down 4 of our crepes onto a large sheet of saran wrap on a table, followed by a lot of prosciutto slices. We took about 3 packs, so I'm going to say roughly 16 to 18 slices. These are going to get nice and shingled out in one layer, followed by another layer underneath it, and then we're going to spread our cool duxelle all over. Now, it might look a little crunky or a little chunky at first. You'll eventually end with a nice smooth layer to lay your rested beef on, which has been chilling in the fridge in its nice little coat of mustard and seasoning. I decided to aim this beef to go right on the bottom half of the layering so that when you flip over the saran wrap with the crepes and everything, you don't have to do too much of a twist and push together and hope it doesn't fall apart. This is where the saran wrap comes in handy, because instead of having to touch the crepes and lift them for yourself, you can use the saran wrap almost as if you're rolling sushi. I was about half a crepe short when it came to the length, but it was alright. I took the saran wrap and managed to twist it around and make it work. The second piece of saran wrap acts as a nice little extra layer to help make sure that when you roll it along the table, it gets nice and tight and pushing all of those flavors and things together into itself. This is again going to go into the fridge to set for about an hour so that all those juices can be absorbed and that it holds its shape better when we finally roll it in the pastry at the end. Speaking of pastry, we're going to take 2 servings of puff pastry that we got from the store, press them out and roll them together so that we get a large long sheet of puff pastry. This is a little bit larger and thicker than a typical Beef Wellington, which usually calls for 1 sheet of puff pastry, so 2 should do the trick. Once our chilled beef baby has come out, we can now place this right in the middle and tuck our pastry around the edges, rolling this together into a tight little beef giant burrito and making sure that there's little gaps as possible. Like many things in life, it's good to have a tight roll on things like this. I'm now employing the strategy I use when guests come over to the house, which means you tuck all the stuff you don't want them to see under the bed. Once everything front facing is looking nice and good and nobody looks at the bottom, we're going to take 1 more sheet of puff pastry, roll it out, and cut it into rock patch shapes. This is where things kind of deviate from a typical Beef Wellington, which usually has a pastry lattice or some knife work. Because this is a marbled rock roast, I thought it'd be fun to emulate those patterns with patches of rocks in different altitudes. I'm going to cut these into nice rough patches, stack a couple on each other, and use egg wash to bind them together. Once this is less of a smooth beef burrito and more of a large craggy rock beef burrito, we're going to season the remaining egg wash with some Goron spice, or in this case some cayenne and paprika, because Gorons live in a space that is very hot, so I'm guessing a lot of the Goron spice are dried chili powders that are found there. The whole thing gets brushed with a good helping of the seasoned egg wash, and to give it that signature marbled rock roast look, we're going to take 2 bones from turkey legs that we took the meat off them and stick them right into the sides to give this more of a portable situation if you're strong enough, like a rock monster. And this is going to go directly into a oven at 375 degrees for about an hour and 20 minutes, just until the interior has reached about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Oftentimes when I work with a lot of puff pastry, there's a lot of scraps that I really don't like to throw away, so what I like to do is to take all of the scraps, kind of mash them into one little ball and roll it out into one smooth sheet. In this case, we still have a lot of that seasoned egg wash on hand, as well as a half-eaten block of Parmesan in the fridge. So what I'm going to do is brush the entire surface of this sheet with a little bit of egg wash and then shave a mountain load of Parmesan right on top. Then we're going to take a rolling pin and do some terraforming by pressing this mountain of Parmesan directly into the pastry, and we're going to season this with a little bit of pepper while we roll this up. Once we have a nice little tube, I'm going to cut this into rounds and put them on a tray so that we have little puff pastry egg wash Parmesan circles. These are going to get popped into an oven for about 20 minutes or so until they've browned, and after they come out, well, you guessed it, more Parmesan, because that stuff is really good, and no matter how much you eat, it always is never enough. It's just nice being able to make little snacks for your friends out of the leftovers you have, which would otherwise go into the trash. Oh wait, let's hit this with a little bit more honey on top, because honey really goes well with pepper and cheese. Oh yeah, these were gone in 5 minutes. This needed also to rest for an hour and a half, because if we cut into this right away, it would have been quite the disaster with juices spilling everywhere and steam just billowing out. Sometimes you just have to take your time with things. Now for the moment that I've been waiting for a long time, the final cross section. Let's give this a nice slice down the middle, make sure we cut through and open this up. And I present to you our version of the marbled rock roast from The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, with our interpretation, the marbled chuck beef Wellington roast, which I will say looks pretty good. Not too many juices are coming out, and the inside seems to be cooked pretty well to my taste. I'm gonna go ahead and give myself a pretty generous slice, because with things like this, if you're not being generous with how much you're serving, why even make it in the first place? Give this a bite, get some of the pastry, get some of the duxelle, the prosciutto, the crepe, and the beef. This is very good, I will say. I can understand why if Gorons ate this, they would think of nothing but eating this for their entire life. This would probably be good with a nice sauce that was both acidic and sweet to go along with it, but by itself, this is very good. It took a lot of restraint to make sure that we didn't eat too much of this, because it did put us in kind of a food coma for a while, but we made sure to divvy this whole thing up and take this all home, not one bit of waste, and I think Link would be proud of that. I did eat this for the next 3 days though.
Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. They've been a great partner in supporting the Babish culinary universe and bringing my websites to life. From websites to online stores to domains and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for you to build your online presence. They also have SEO tools so that your site is getting found and searched by more people more often. If you want to try it for yourself, you can start your free trial today by visiting squarespace.com/babish to get 10% off your first purchase.